So with the Japanese guys, what we see here, and I've mentioned this to you guys earlier, we all remember Manchuria, 1931, right? And as we move through the 30s, you're going to see the Japanese continue to incur further and further into China. And, Shanghai, and then what happens in Nanking, which I talked about the rape of Nanking in here before, is really nothing short of a crime against humanity. Now, the number that more generally is used, about 250,000. Guys, these are civilians, okay? So men, women, and children, elderly, many of the people in Nanking, just like when you're in a war, a lot of the young men are in uniform. So what's left behind, women and children and the elderly. And the Japanese behavior here is, it's almost unfathomable what happened there. So the guy that was in charge of this operation was Prince Yasuhiko Osaka. And then introduced to you here, this is the Emperor of Japan, Emperor Hirohito, who the Japanese believed is actually a descendant of the sun god. So he's somewhat of a godlike figure to be worshipped. He's young, impressionable, and as the military power of Japan grows, they will have sway with him. And then this guy will be in the notes a little bit later. This is Hideki Tojo, who will assume command of the army in 1941. And he is the one responsible for convincing the emperor to attack the United States on December 7th. On December 7th, 1941, as we'll learn, guys, it wasn't just Pearl Harbor, Hawaii that was attacked, but also the Philippines, Wake Island. There were several different attacks, all coordinated at the same time, the same day. Okay, and Tojo is one of 6 Japanese that is executed at the end of the war. There were hundreds of Japanese sentenced to death, but only 6 death sentences were carried out. And Tojo was a war criminal, and that's how he met his fate. Okay, and then Mussolini, he's a different guy. I think kind of the best way to describe Mussolini is a thug. We know he's a fascist and really coins that phrase or that term, fascism. But he's not an ideologue like Hitler. So he doesn't have this ideology of Volkish nationalism, supremacy of the Aryan race, and that sort of thing. But he is a power-hungry dictator, and so he doesn't. I mean, really, you hear the phrase "stick your finger in the wind, see which way the wind's blowing," right? So he'll do whatever gives him more power. He doesn't really have an ideology, so to speak. And so we're going to be talking about him shortly on the next slide. During the war, over 400,000 Italians will be killed. And obviously, he's going to tie his fate to Hitler and the Japanese, as these two will form with Germany the Axis powers. Okay. The Soviet Union's, most of you probably know this already, that they're going to be our ally during the war. You guys know that, right? As the saying goes, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Yeah. So Stalin will be an ally. And really, when you look at World War II, without Russia, it's questionable whether we would have been able to win in Europe. Okay. Because so much pressure from Europe was relieved when Hitler invades Russia. Okay, and that's really where the majority of the deaths of World War II will take place, is between Germany and Russia. Okay, so we'll get into that later on. Okay, and then this attack on the Ethiopians, okay, which is what I have on the next slide, could almost be seen as a war crime as well, just because it is a David versus Goliath type situation. So if you do look up the word thug in the dictionary, you'll see this picture right there. Okay. All right. they called Mussolini Il Duce. Okay. All right. So now one of the things that kind of frightening from that slide previous here is that Italy, Russia, and Japan were all allies in World War I. But as we discussed, they will not be in World War II. Russia will be opposite Italy and Japan. Okay. So we know Manchuria, Shanghai, and then you move, as you can see, the growth of the Japanese conquering of China, okay, and that will continue southward and westward as well, okay. So we turn our attention to Africa, and guys, as you're probably aware from history, the continent of Africa was carved up by European colonialism. Yes. So the British, the French, the Dutch, the Italians, okay. Germany was late to the game. So if you go to these different countries, Morocco, what language is spoken in Morocco? French. Okay, this at the time, guys, is called French Morocco. Have you guys seen the movie Casablanca? Okay. So that we'll talk more about that a little bit later as the war starts. Algeria is controlled by the Italians. No, actually, this French Algiers. Okay. Tunisia and Libya controlled by the Italians. And what about Egypt? British, yeah, the British, okay, which is going to play a pivotal role here as the war begins a little bit later, okay? And then throughout here, almost every single one of these nations is colonized. And from what I understand, at least this is what the Uber driver in New Orleans from Ethiopia told me, that Ethiopia was the only African nation never colonized or ever colonized, okay? Now, as you can see, Italy's going to invade there, but they will leave few years later, and they will not colonize. But this is actually called Italian Somaliland. At the time, in 1935, this is Italian Somaliland, okay? And just like what happened here between Japan and China, there's a crisis that is created, okay, giving Italy an excuse to invade Ethiopia. Now, what Mussolini's actually doing here is practicing. Guys, we are talking about in World War II, totally new weapons of war. So the biplane is phased out to the mono-wing plane, okay, which is a much faster, more agile plane. And then they build bigger planes called bombers, okay, which we did not see in World War I, okay. We've got better machine guns, we've got better artillery, howitzers, and so forth, and we've got much better tanks than we had in World War I, okay? And Italy has these new weapons, and they need somewhere to practice. And so they're going to choose Ethiopia. Now, Ethiopia is a third world country, to say the least, okay? And it's not really a united country, it's tribal. Okay, kind of like Afghanistan is tribal, right? And so there's different tribes throughout the country, and they do have a president, and his name is Haile Selassie, okay? And they don't have much of a military, you understand. Okay, so their chances of fighting against the Italians here are not good at all. We're talking about horseback, and guys, they don't have a lot of guns. We're literally talking about soldiers that are using spears. And I'm not making that up, against tanks and machine guns. Okay? So this is Haile Selassie. This is from a video of him speaking at the League of Nations. Remember that international organization after World War I that was supposed to try and keep peace and stop conflict from taking place? He is speaking at the League of Nations, and he's begging the world for help in this speech. He's saying, Italy is about to invade my country. We have done nothing to Italy. Please help us. Those pleas will fall on deaf ears. I mean, are the British going to send troops down here to Africa to defend Ethiopia? But the French, do they want war? No, they don't. So nobody's gonna stop him. I mean, he's begging, and nobody's gonna help. Okay, just like nobody helped the Chinese. Okay, so when they invade, actually these tribes from around Ethiopia will unite behind Solis and fight. That fighting will last less than 2 weeks. Okay, as the overwhelming odds. But guys, Ethiopia has exactly one airplane in the whole country. It's the president's plane. This is 1935, right? Lindbergh made his flight in 1927. All right. There are lots of planes in the United States, but not in Ethiopia. So many of these Ethiopians have never seen an airplane before. You understand? I mean, can you imagine the first time you see an airplane flying? You know, if you hadn't heard about it or read it, you know, you're like, what the heck is that? You know, it's like some kind of loud bird. But the first loud birds that they see are going to be dropping bombs on their villages, on their mud huts. This is for real, okay? And so it's a bloodbath. And the Ethiopians will fight and they will die, 30,000 of them, and then they'll just like, no, we can't do this. You know what I mean? And so it's an easy conquer for Mussolini, okay? This is 1935. 1936 is a really important year here, okay? Because Hitler's going to start to test the waters as well, all right? And there's also something going on in Spain. And I know you guys have been wondering, you know, while we've been talking about Hitler all this time, you're like, Mr. Ebright, what's going on in Spain? Right? Yeah, well, there's a civil war there, right? Between 1936 and 1939, called the Spanish Civil War, okay? There's a lot to unpack on this slide right here, okay? In fact, I don't know if we'll get off this slide today, okay? Maybe for a video or two, okay? So let's talk first about, before I get into the Spanish Civil War, let's talk about this map. And this is vital to your knowledge here, this map, okay? A couple of things I want to point out. The Treaty of Versailles, we know it did a lot, right? It forced Germany to pay reparations, yes? 33 billion, right? We knew about that already. Okay. But it also limited the size of Germany's military to 100,000 troops, which is a small number, okay? Air Force, the Germans, not allowed. No Air Force. They also limited the size of their Navy. And they also stripped some territory from Germany, okay? And this region right here is called the Sudetenland. Now there's a mountain range that runs through here, okay, called the Alps, okay? Guys, this territory is ceded to a new country called Czechoslovakia, okay, after World War I. There are 3 million people of German ancestry living in here, okay? But it creates a mountain range and a barrier between Czechoslovakia and Germany, giving it a defensive barrier, yes? Okay, so Hitler wants those 3 million Germans back under the fatherland. You follow me? That's going to happen in 1938. We're in 36 now. The other thing here is the Rhineland, which is known as a DMZ. Okay, the Rhine River is the largest river in Central Europe. It runs right along this line right here. Okay, and the French, having been invaded by Germany twice in the last 50 years, the Franco-Prussian War and World War I, they said under the Treaty of Versailles that this would be a DMZ. Germany could not place any troops in this area. With me? Now, during the time between the wars, after World War I, while Germany's trying to pay its $33 billion in reparations, there were times where the French sent troops into this DMZ, the Rhineland, and forcibly with their troops took coal. This is a very coal-rich area called the Ruhr region of Germany, very coal-rich. So the French send in troops into Germany and take coal as payment for the reparations. Now think about this. Let's say we had been in a war with Canada and we lost and we owed them money. And so during that time, they told us we're not allowed to put any troops across our northern border with Canada. And during the years after the war, Canada sent troops into North Dakota, Montana, Minnesota, and so forth, and took American wheat as payment for reparations that we owed Canada. Now, how do you think the American people would feel about that? Think that would make us angry? Guys, this is the stuff that helped lead to the rise of Hitler. Okay, because Hitler, his number one thing, was opposition to the Treaty of Versailles. Okay, it was a stab in the back of the German people. And the French are going to bring this whole war on themselves. These are the lessons we have to learn from history. Because, guys, after World War II, we will not behave this way like we did after World War. We will learn our lessons. Okay? So, very important map here. Okay? Let's talk about Spain, and then I'm going to come back to this. Okay? So, in Spain, the civil war is led between the fascists and the Republican government. We have a Republican government, right? So this is between the fascists. Does anybody know the name of the leader of the fascists in France, or in Spain, excuse me? Francisco Franco. Okay, Franco's the fascist. Now, guys, who do you think is going to support Franco with weapons? Germany and Italy. Yeah, not just weapons, but also aircraft. What you're going to see in the Spanish Civil War is German pilots flying in the Civil War in Spain. With an air force they're not supposed to have. You understand? Okay? Now, these weapons that the Germans have built are very good, and they want to try them out too. So they give them to Franco, and the guinea pigs would be the Spanish people. This is a bloody civil war. Now, do you think the United States is going to help Spain? Do we want to go to war? What are we? We're isolationists. Okay? Now, were there people in the United States that wanted to go fight on behalf of Spain and fight fascism? Yeah. We passed laws in this country to make it illegal for U.S. citizens to go over and fight for the Spanish or the British, for that matter, later on. Okay? So there was a way to go there. Remember when I talked about ISIS? And I talked about how there were American citizens that went over there and fought, European citizens, civilians, that went over and fought against ISIS to stop fascism. Because it is Islamofascism is what it is. Okay? And what you would do during this time is go to Canada and get a fake passport saying that you were a Canadian citizen. And then you could go to Spain or Britain. The first American to die in World War II was an American civilian pilot that got fake papers in Canada and went over and flew for the RAF, the Royal Air Force, in the Battle of Britain in 1940. First American to die. Okay? So we see this, and eventually, guys, there's going to be enough Americans that make it over there to have their own brigade called the Abraham Lincoln Brigade. Because this is bloody. Now, who's going to come to the aid of the Spanish Republican government? You got the Nazis and the Italians helping the fascists. Not England, they don't want war. Not France, they don't want war. Russia. Yeah, I mean, crazy, man. The communists, the Russians are going to help the Republican government. The enemy of my enemy. Okay? And so you're going to see Russian pilots flying Russian planes against German pilots flying German planes in the Spanish Civil War. And guys, they're getting valuable experience here. Okay? And they get to try out these new weapons. Okay? So this is bloody. I mean, you could do 2 weeks on the Spanish Civil War. I mean, I've studied a little bit about it, read a little bit. It's complicated. Okay? I mean, you got to know Spain. You guys have all heard of Ernest Hemingway, right? He went over there during the Civil War and wrote about it. Okay? It was pretty bad. Pretty bad. Okay? So it bears mentioning in my lecture. Okay? All right. Then, in 1936, Germany is going to host the Olympics. I remember thinking this, what was it, 2000 that China hosted? What year was that? 2000, huh? 2004? Beijing Olympics? I don't know. Do you remember watching that?
We were born in 2000. I was literally born as,
Okay. Sorry.
as it was happening.
Maybe it was 2008.
You're older.
Yeah, look at it. Yeah, guys, the Chinese put on a freaking unbelievable show, okay, for the Olympics. It was amazing what they did. Hitler is going to bring the world into Berlin, okay? It's a modern city. There's no homeless on the streets. You know what I mean? It's all clean. It's new. This beautiful new stadium. Guys, they are out of the Depression. This remilitarization. They've built the highway system, the Autobahn. Okay, guys, you know we don't build our highway system until the 1950s. Okay, the Germans are going to build theirs in the 1930s, the Autobahn. Okay, so people come in and they're in awe of what Germany has done under Hitler, okay? And they're going to host the Olympics, 2008. Okay, so do you remember? So you can go back and look like the opening ceremonies. I mean, it was really neat what they did. I mean, they put on a good show, and that's what the Germans do here. And what they're doing is they're building up some goodwill from the world. Okay? Yeah, they don't like Jews, but I don't really care about Jews either. You know what I mean? That's kind of the attitude of people. They don't care. Okay? And so, now, you guys know this. Now, we have some track people in here. Track stars? Okay. Yeah. So you guys know about 1936 Olympics, right? Who steals the show? Who? Usain Bolt.
I'm really watching the movie. There's a movie.
Jesse Owens. Jesse Owens is the son of sharecroppers, descendants of slaves in Decatur, Alabama. When Jesse Owens was in middle school, they moved to Ohio. Okay, looking for work, as many African Americans did, move to the north. Later become known as the Great Migration. But Jesse, when he was in middle school, one of his teachers, who was the track coach, asked him to come out for track. And boy, that was a good decision. Okay, Jesse showed a lot of promise. And by the time he was a senior in high school, he was breaking Olympic records. Okay, he went to The Ohio State University and enrolled and ran track there, and then went to the Olympics. Okay, where he won not one, not two, not three, but 4 Olympic gold medals. This is an African American, descendant of slaves. Hitler's in the audience. He's watching this. Hitler shook the hand of every gold medalist except for Jesse Owens, because he was black and he was inferior. No, he wasn't. He was superior. Okay? And he shoved it in Hitler's face. Okay? And it's a great moment, very proud moment for, I think, all Americans, not just African Americans. But guys, Jesse Owens treated like a second-class citizen in the United States before he went and after he went, when he got home. This is the tragedy of it. Okay? But the German people, when Jesse Owens came into the stadium, they cheered. They loved it. Because it's just like when you see whatever the field is, whether it's science or sports, business, whatever you're passionate about. If you're a scientist and Albert Einstein walks in the room, you're like, whoa. You know what I mean? You're in awe. When Jesse Owens walked into the room, people were in awe, just like Usain Bolt. He's a phenomenal athlete. Fastest man in the world. Okay? So the German athletes, the German people, they all were attracted to Jesse Owens. Okay? And the best German athlete is a guy named Lutz Long. And he's phenomenal. Yes, he's a tall, blonde-haired, blue-eyed athlete. And he's a really good one. But Jesse Owens is going to defeat him at every turn. Okay? They become close friends, which really pisses Hitler. Okay? So I got a little video I want to show you on this, couple minutes long. And, they describe this very well. Okay? Yeah. Here, yes, you are. It's a great picture. That's Lutz Long there. Come on, Mom. Yeah, it might be Photoshop.
It is not only a tally of medals which turns a champion into a hero. If there's one man who will exemplify the ultimate Olympic hero, it is America's Jesse Owens. His achievements, though equalled since in the record books, are as remarkable for the dignity and grace in which they were performed as for the barriers they broke. Archie Williams was Owens' teammate in 1936 and the winner of the 400 meters.
I guess we call him the Superman of the team, and everybody knows that. But I mean, I felt that he was one of the many.
Surrounded by Nazi propaganda and its doctrine of Aryan superiority, Owens became the dominant figure of the 1936 Games in Berlin. He was cheered every time he entered the stadium, and treated like a star. He was, after all, the fastest man in the world, black or white. Owens won the 100 meters with relative ease from his teammate Ralph Metcalfe. The 200 meters saw a bigger margin of victory, breaking the Olympic record by almost half a second. He completed the sprint treble by helping the American 4x100 meter relay team to a 12-yard victory with a world record that would stand for 20 years. His fourth gold medal proved to be more of a battle.
He was so good. He never practiced a long time. I don't think he practiced enough, because some of the times he would foul out, or he would always miss qualifying because he didn't have a step down.
Owens almost failed to qualify for the long jump until his main rival, the German Lutz Long, suggested that he move his mark back and make sure of a safe, legal jump. Once in the final, Owens and Long battled it out in front of a strongly partisan crowd. When Long actually equaled Owens' jump, the German crowd erupted in excitement. Owens responded with an even longer lead, then sealed his victory with a new Olympic record with his final job. In front of Hitler, the 100,000 crowd, Lutz Long was the first person to congratulate Owens, cementing a friendship that was to last until Long was killed at the Battle of San Pietro in 1943. Recalling his feelings at the time, Owens later said, "You can melt down all the medals and cups I have, and they wouldn't be a plating for the 24-carat friendship I felt for Lutz Long at that moment."
Yeah, so I mean, that's pretty neat. Now, I got some more ugliness to tell you. The 400, the relay race that they, smashed the record and stood for all those years. Jesse Owens wasn't supposed to run in that race. The four runners had broken the world record already, and they were going to win the Olympics. But Hitler asked that two of our runners not run because they were Jewish. And the American Olympic Committee bowed to Hitler on that. They caved. And so they replaced the two Jewish runners with two African American sprinters. And of course, they won the gold too. But the American Olympic Committee, failed to stand up for what was right. And they've done that in more recent times as well. If you guys have paid attention to what happened to our gymnasts with the team doctor, the American gymnasts, you guys heard about that, right? No. The sexual abuse. Yeah, this guy's horrible. I mean, he's a monster. What he did to our gymnasts, and they reported it to the American Olympic Committee, and they didn't do anything. They swept it under the rug. And then we find out a couple months ago, one of our gymnasts testified in front of Congress that she reported it to the FBI. And the FBI sat on it for a year, which meant dozens of our gymnasts were subject to this freaking sick doctor for another year. Okay? Has those FBI agents been fired? They haven't. Okay? I mean, it's crazy. It seems like sometimes there's not accountability in our government. Seems like that a lot these days. But anyhow, Jesse Owens, and it's a sad story because he comes home, and you guys know how our Olympians oftentimes will benefit off their success financially, because most of our athletes that are in the Olympics are amateurs, except for the NBA players that play basketball. Most of our athletes are amateurs, so they don't get paid. So when they win, they get endorsements like Wheaties, Wheaties cereal boxes, and do advertising and stuff, and can make some good money. Jesse Owens never benefited from the success financially. And he didn't graduate from Ohio State University, guys. He couldn't. He couldn't read and write at that level of a college level. He flunked out, like my dad. Okay? My dad went 1 year. Jesse Owens went 1 year. Okay? As a lot of people do. They go to college and are like, this isn't for me. Okay? And Jesse just wasn't able to do it. So he never really lived like lavishly after being one of the most famous and maybe the greatest athlete of the 20th century. So he held different jobs like, at the Boys and Girls Club, stuff like that. The government named him a Goodwill ambassador for a year. So, he lived in Cleveland, Ohio, and relatively poor the rest of his life. He, in his later years, he was actually put on trial for tax evasion. He went like 5 or 6 years, something like that, without paying taxes. It's not like he was, he's a millionaire skipping out on taxes, you understand? He just didn't pay his taxes. And so they put him on trial, and he testified at his own trial. And the judge asked me, said, Jesse, why didn't you pay your taxes? Like, I don't know. I didn't really know how to fill out the forms, and I don't know. And then Jesse Owens said this. He said, Your Honor, I feel like I've paid my debt to the United States. And the judge agreed. Let him off. Okay. It's kind of a sad story. Okay. But somebody that I definitely want to point out, and, those of you that didn't know the Jesse Owens story, now you do. Okay. And he shoved it in the face of Hitler. Okay. Which is great. Yes? Okay. Take that Aryan supremacy bullshit and shove it up your butt. Excuse me. Okay. Jesse Owens, man, he's the best. Okay. I love that guy. And he's a good man. He's a good person, too. Yeah.
The book I'm reading is about Louis Zamperini.
And he was in the Olympics,
Also
too.
was in that Olympics.
Yeah, he ran the 5,000 meter. Yeah. Yeah, if you don't know the Louis Zamperini story, that's awesome. Unbroken. Yeah. 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 And he didn't compete real well at the Olympics, but and he wanted to go back. Yeah, what the Jap, I don't know how far you are along in the book.
Yeah.
Well, he's going to get captured, right, by the Japanese. So, spoiler alert. And they find out who he is. And you'll read about that while he's in the camps. Like, the stuff they do to Louis Zamperini it's horrible. Okay, and so like when we start talking about the brutality of the Japanese, you'll be able to back me up, because their treatment of prisoners of war, inhumane, especially Louis. Okay, because if you were famous, they'd make an example out of you. Okay, yeah. So anything else with Jesse? No, pretty amazing. In fact, okay, so we're talking about the 36 Olympics. There's a bobsledder in the same Olympics. There might have been in 32 Olympics. Who was a pilot. Wealthy guy, bobsledder, wealthy guy, he's a pilot. He was the guy that was flying for the RAF that died. He was an American Olympian as well. Yeah, pretty amazing stuff. We were just talking about Jesse Owens.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Hitler didn't like him.
No.
There you go.
Yes. Okay. So, Bergen, your mother's at the door. Sorry, I couldn't resist. No. Okay. All right. So Hitler builds up kind of this goodwill with having the Olympics. Now he's going to test the waters, see what he can get away with. Okay, so he's going to send troops into the Rhineland, which is, this is an extreme violation of the Treaty of Versailles. Now remember, Treaty of Versailles was created in 1919. So they've been living under it for about 17 years. And as Hitler sends his troops into the Rhineland, he tells his generals, now we didn't know this at the time, of course, he said, if the French show up, resist, retreat, do not engage the French troops. So Hitler sends his army in. He's telling everybody, this is publicized. Okay, he's putting it out there. We're going into the Rhine. It's Germany. We're going in. Do the French show up? No. Do the British show up to enforce the Treaty of Versailles? No. Okay, but we know today that they would have retreated had they showed up, but they didn't. Okay, and so this could be construed as a form of appeasement, which we're going to see many examples over the next few years here, where people are willing to give up their principles in order to avoid conflict, which is how you define appeasement. The giving up of your principles to avoid conflict. Let me give you an easier example. I've been married for 24 years, 25 this March. Now, there are times when my wife and I will have a disagreement, and I know I'm right. But, you know, if I follow through on that and explain to her that I'm right, and she disagrees with me, then she's going to be upset with me for, you know, I don't know, hours, maybe days. And I don't really want to put myself through that. And it's not that big of a deal to prove I'm right. So I'll just appease her and say, yeah, honey, yeah, you're right. My bad. Now, that's not healthy for a relationship. You got to have communication, right? But sometimes you just don't want to fight. You don't want to have the conflict. Guys that have girlfriends, you know what I'm talking about. Stand up for yourselves, men. I'm being a hypocrite there, yes. All right, yeah, so, I mean, but guys, now this is geopolitical appeasement, and think about this. How many times we could go back and say, what if we stood up to Hitler in 1933, or in 34, or in 35, or 36, or 38, before this war started? You know what I mean? But we didn't. And the major reason why is because people did not want conflict. They did not want to go to war. And those dictators that rose, the Mussolinis, the Hitlers, the Hiroshimas, they're ready for war. They've been preparing for war. And they're seeking it. And when nobody's willing to stand up to the bully gets what he wants. Okay? And that is appeasement. All right? So we'll be talking a lot about this, okay, as we go through. And how much time? We got about 6 minutes? Okay. I'm going to go ahead and throw up a video. Actually, why don't we just stop there? Because this is where I finished with that. We'll begin tomorrow with a video about what may be construed as modern appeasement. As we look at China, we look at Iran, and just kind of ask ourselves some questions about that. Okay, so we'll begin with that tomorrow. Sound good?